Hi there, and thanks for tuning in to another FINITE Podcast episode. Today we're addressing a topic I'm sure is top of mind for you at the moment. After all, we are a podcast for B2B technology and SaaS marketers. And SaaS, according to global stock markets, is under threat. Antony Cousins, VP Product at Meltwater, has a highly perceptive understanding of how economics, technology, and business practices collide, and brings to light some of the seemingly irrational ways business leaders and markets at large are responding to automation. Ant identifies the signals and origins of SaaSageddon headlines. He discerns which organizations are really at risk and guides us on how platforms should be pivoting in this new environment. This episode seeks to clear the air and challenge preconceived notions about AI's true place in the workforce, and provide a sense of hope that technology will be better used by and for the people in our future. If you want to know how you can batten down the hatches and ride the wave of oncoming shifts as a marketing leader in SaaS, this episode is for you. Hi, Ant. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the FINITE Podcast. I previously heard you speak at another event and was so blown away by the breadth of your knowledge. I thought, wow, we need to get you on the show. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your take on the dreaded death of SaaS, or the SaaSageddon, or whatever you want to call it. I wonder if there'll be some myth busting done today, and I wonder if we'll be really challenging the assumptions of our listeners, who are all marketers and marketing leaders in SaaS. So very front of mind topic for them at the moment. Before we do that, would you please give us a bit of a lowdown of who you are, how you got into tech and SaaS and marketing, and your journey so far?
Got it. And I'll take it as a compliment, the breadth of knowledge and not just the how long you've been around. So I started out at the Ministry of Defense in 2000, and I did 7 years in tech roles. So I've always had this kind of background in tech, building applications many years ago. And then I did 7 years in tech, and I got on a leadership scheme at the Ministry of Defense, and they said, if you do one more job in tech, you're screwed. You got to do something different. This is back in the day when people used to read newspapers. And I said, in the newspaper where it says an MOD spokesperson said, how do I become an MOD spokesperson? Sounds like fun. And this was at the height of the Iraq and Afghan kind of conflicts in the Middle East. So the Ministry of Defense was front page news most days. It was probably the busiest press office in Whitehall at the time. And they said, you've got zero background in communications. Like, this is not a time to join the press office. You're not ready for the press office. I was like, how hard can it be? So then, fortunately, I'd fixed the PC of one of the press officers who was recruiting at the time. And he managed to get me into the list of 20 odd people who were, applying for that press officer role. And then I got the job and I became a press officer, and I found my second passion, which was communications. So then my career kind of went off on a bit of a tangent, right, into Iraq and Afghanistan to offer kind of on the ground media advice, then into counterterrorism, which was more about kind of countering Al-Qaeda's single narrative on the streets in London, and then into the Middle East during the Arab Spring, as it turned out to be. So all the social media revolutions as they were. And that for me was like a turning point in seeing this new technology. This is like 2000, I am old. This is like 2010 or so. And seeing the impact the social media had in non-democratic countries, getting themselves new governments because enough people wanted it. And in part using social media to achieve that. And I was like, this technology is amazing. Look how much better it's going to make our world, right? All the power now is with the people. And that was obviously naive, because then we had Cambridge Analytica, we had the Brexit campaign, we had misinformation, disinformation, fake news, filter bubbles, all those kind of issues we're now still grappling with, were sort of new ideas to us back then. But it still gave me this passion for social media. As a specific part of communications. And then in 2014, I jumped into an AI startup. So I kind of got back in love with technology as a role. And ever since 2014, my job has been either AI, communications, or both. So for the last 10 years, I've been in AI startups. Most recently, the startup Fact Matter, which I sold to Cision, ends up staying at Cision for a couple of years advising on AI strategy, and then moved to Meltwater after having done a kind of review of the market, seeing who's really spending on AI, who really understands where it's going, And for me, Meltwater was the only company I kind of had in that top right-hand mental box. So I was very happy when I found a role here. And here I lead on AI strategy, as well as kind of how AI integrates across our product suite. So riding the wave of the year of AI, which I, like most of my colleagues who've been in it for over a decade, it's like, this is the year. This is the year everyone will get AI. And then 2023, I think, was that year. You realize, oh, that's what it feels like when everyone's into AI. So yeah, riding the wave and enjoying it.
Really interesting story, and kind of already understanding the impact that our AI will have before, everyone else is super interesting. And I can't believe someone told you that you needed to get out of technology, that you shouldn't have another technology job. That just would not happen today, that's for sure. So it sounds like you have a really good understanding, even through your career thus far, of the broader narrative of tech and innovation and AI and how it interacts with broader contextual factors like, terrorism and global crises. So I think it's a really interesting perspective to get. I'd love you to set the scene for us and give your perspective on where the death of SaaS narrative has come from. What were the kind of triggers and signals that SaaS could be under threat?
Yeah, and so there's a melting pot, right? There's a lot of different influences, and one of the primary influences is the LLM providers themselves, right? Like the Anthropics and the OpenAIs of the world have all raised huge amounts of money on the kind of hypothesis that their models are going to be ubiquitously available for everyone to use for all things, right? Part of their narrative is invest in us because we're taking over the world. Invest in us because everyone's going to use this technology and generate so much value. Between November 2022, when ChatGPT first came out or first hit the masses, and 2023, when the hype kind of started going up. And I think 2024 was probably peak hype, in my opinion. Probably towards the end of 2024 was peak hype around, oh my God, this technology is going to change the world. But where is that value? Right? Where are we actually seeing it change our roles and change our lives? And we hadn't really had that point at that point. And so the hype train had to escalate, right? It had to escalate between people who can use it in their daily lives to, oh no, it's work. Work is going to fundamentally change. The way you do your jobs is going to fundamentally change. We're going to save so much money because we're going to automate so much of this work. And that hype train has continued to escalate. And now I think that hype train is probably at its peak right now, with people coming with reports left and right saying all these jobs are going to completely disappear. So in part, that expectations of the death of SaaS has come from the drive of the LLM providers themselves to have to say that to justify the valuations and to justify the investment, right? And they're on that train. They cannot get off that train. That has to keep escalating, right? To keep that kind of that money train going. And then the SaaS providers themselves weren't necessarily caught up in that in the 2023 through 2024, where most SaaS providers were saying, this is great for us. We get to increase the quality of our products, right? We get to increase this feature, increase this quality, automate this task, which was causing people problems. And so most SaaS providers were on the train, happy with the train, willing providers will pay the ticket. And that escalated to the point where SaaS providers were talking about automating huge chunks of their product, which actually became supportive of the overarching narrative of the automation of work. Because where do people do their work? It's in software. So like the SaaS providers became part of that hype train. What changed, and this is where the kind of the SaaSpocalypse kind of comes in, is that it's now gotten to the point where you don't necessarily need a SaaS provider to build software which you can use to get value from. So you can now go to Claude Cowork and Lovables and kind of VOs of the world. These tools, you can go and basically vibe code, right? The ability for you to go and prompt, give me an application that allows me to generate a press release, right? And now it's a very thin application on top of effectively Claude or ChatGPT. That part of the hype train is a new part of the hype train. That's kind of less than a year old, believe it or not. People have been saying that. But now the capabilities of those tools have got so good, people are starting to imagine, whoa, it's not just thin wrapper, simple applications anymore. People are now going to be vibe coding a new HR software. They'd be vibe coding their Salesforce. They'd be vibe coding their HubSpots. And that was the start of the SaaSpocalypse, when people realized that it wasn't just thin wrapper applications people could build for themselves. It was whole applications and whole suites. And that's what took a chunk of cash out of the SaaS valuations, which was the SaaSpocalypse, right? $1 trillion, over $1 trillion of value wiped off the market caps of all those companies combined. Now there's some, that's the narrative, right? That's the story. That's the reason why that impact happened. But there's definitely a lot of, I think, nuance and myths in there. So the first of which I would say is, it's true, you can go to Claude Cowork and to Lovable and vibe code yourself an application, and it's very easy to get to that first 80%. You know, it's very easy to produce something that looks great. And it's like, oh, it took me 20 minutes to produce this application, which does this task for me. Amazing. And if that's all you need it to do, that simple task, then great, good job, well done. Use it. You've saved yourself some time. You've lived the dream, right? But what no one wants to do, right, is deal with the edge cases, right? Those nuanced kind of like, it doesn't quite work when I try and do this, right? What no one wants to do is listen to other people's requirements. If you want your team to be working in a consistent fashion, if you want your team to benefit from that, you need to start sharing that with other people, and other people have other views of how they want to use the software. Compliance, governance, workflows, permissions, right? There's a lot of challenging detail in building software, which a SaaS provider will tell you is the reason they exist, but isn't necessarily well understood always by the end user, and certainly clearly has not been well understood by the market. So I think there's still plenty of room for people to build software, because I don't think anyone is going to want to spend their budget on people to train them to build software and to deal with those edge cases and the governance, the workflows, the compliance, the regulatory requirements. Those are not things you want to spend your budget training your people how to do. That's what software providers are for. So I think there is not an insignificant myth to burst that, oh, we'll just vibe code a new Salesforce. It's not that easy.
Honestly, it all sounds a little bit ridiculous when you put it like that. I'm not going to lie. The amount of sheer resource required and knowledge, nuanced, complex understanding of the, not even just the engineering infrastructure, but like the UX, the platform optimizations that people require, even in, seemingly simple platforms like a project management system. It's about, deeply understanding and anticipating those user needs. And I don't know how project managers would feel if you just vibe coded them a platform that wasn't, suited to them. And you're right, not kind of helping them with those edge cases and synchronizing their entire team. So it is quite funny. Just to kind of take a contrarian stance, is there any part of it that you do think is valid and that the death of might, lead to at least, long-term devaluation of SaaS platforms?
Yeah, there's definitely some use cases, right? So if you've got a really specific use case, so the challenge of being a SaaS provider, you have to build a software which everyone can use. And in our specific industry, we have like a classic challenge, which is you're trying to build software for in-house teams, for agencies, for small agencies, medium-sized agencies, giant agencies, and all of these types of user have subtly different requirements and subtly different levels of maturity of the process that they want to work through, right? And that's classically a challenge for SaaS. We have to build one interface, right? And we can sort of adjust it and give you some ways to manage that within the product. But the more we account for a variety of personas, the more complex the software gets. And therefore, the smaller, less mature organizations, the smaller agencies, that's where they're like, this doesn't feel like my kind of software. I just want something quick and easy. So SaaS providers are always trying to balance their user interface and the level of complexity and maturity with the size and the organizations they're selling to. Now, where this gets really exciting for organizations like us and the benefit for us of this, and it's not about, I think, fighting that process, it's enabling that process. So the benefit we have in this particular industry, I'm not going to say this is true for all SaaS, but we have a ton of proprietary data, right? We've done all the hard yards to build the contracts and the relationships with 700 different media organizations around the world, right? To get access to their data, to stick it in the database. We have 2.5 trillion data points. We have 2 billion documents coming in a day, right? And we've built, to your point, like the scalable processes to enrich every single one of those documents consistently with sentiment, with entity detection, with the sort of metrics of reach and engagement and views, all that kind of stuff is that one, you can't vibe code that, right? No one's vibe coding that. That's hardcore engineering. So that's relatively safe. But on top of that, the user engagement layer, if you have a really specific use case that, this is how my team wants to do it. They want to do this specific thing, and it is relatively simple and it is relatively easy to do, then by all means, go and vibe code that and build that for yourself. You absolutely should do that. And we're going to support you in doing that because we're adding an API. We already have an API with an MCP server with the sort of the agentic enablement that you'd expect is already leading edge for our industry. So we're leaning into that opportunity. We absolutely want you to build more stuff because it means you use more of our product at the end of the day. So whilst you've still got the application for the stuff you can't vibe code, if you have niche use cases and things you really want to cover, by all means, go ahead and we will support you in doing that. So I see for our specific industry, because of that safety, that moat, right, you call it, of all the hardcore data engineering and the scalability of that, we see it as a growth opportunity that people want to start building their own software. By all means, go for it. And the more of that we work with our clients to do, the more we understand, you know what? 3/4 of our clients have just vibe coded an app that does this. Maybe we should build that into our platform. I see it as an opportunity for truly agile software and collaborative software development. So I think this is actually a benefit. That I feel bad for, however, is the companies that don't have that moat, right? If you don't have a source of proprietary data, if you don't have the sort of hardcore engineering at scale problems that we deal with, then yes, I think you're in a little bit of a different proposition. So I think that's where some of the devaluation is true and realistic. Is if your proposition was somehow, oh, we're really good at the process and we're really good at thinking that through, that's a weaker proposition, right? We still have that. We still have the UX designers, to your point, thinking through the multitudes of what is it that the client actually wants to do, what creates value for them. Where is the AI capability? What is the bleeding edge of that? What can we get it to do and not? And what does the human interaction look like on that process? And that's still what we're working on and what we're spending time investing in.
It sounds like a really creative and innovative solution to actually enable the vibe coding. I've heard a lot of CMOs, when I've asked them how they're responding to this shift, they've said they're kind of thinking about repositioning, moving towards more AI agency. But it sounds like those solutions aren't really tackling the core problem that is users want flexibility and they want to be able to, you're right, collaborate with software providers to better suit their needs. I'd love to talk about the companies that maybe don't have as much of that inherent value or long-standing value. What do they look like? How do you discern them? What kind of companies do you think are genuinely quite threatened by this shift?
So I think, let's be honest, right? The agency model itself, right, is, the purpose of the agency model is we've done this 100 times, therefore we know how to do this really well. And we're going to sell you our time to impart upon you our experience and our expertise in this, because we're always out learning and trying to keep on the bleeding edge of what's possible, right? And that model was already transitioning from pay us for our time to give you that kind of output and that value towards, we'll commit you to deliver the value, to deliver the outcome, right? That transition was already happening, and AI has really sped that up. And I'll say for sure, if you're still basing your commercial model on time, you're already screwed, right? You absolutely need to be moving towards an outcome-based kind of model, right? If anyone listening, Hard Numbers, right? Good example of a small agency is came out very early with no, the reason they're called Hard Numbers, we will guarantee you this commitment. It takes an agreement, right? They're not going to commit to something that's unrealistic. It takes hard conversations to agree this is what's actually possible, and we will commit to delivering that for you. Every agency should be moving towards that kind of model, because if you're still doing time-based model, given automation of AI, the more AI you use, the less money you make. So I think I would look at any company that has a time-based model and say you're in trouble. If you haven't already started that transition, you're frankly probably already behind the curve. I'm not saying it's too late. That'd be a bit harsh, but you need to really speed up in your transition. And so there's the time-based model, and there's also, yes, the access to data. If you don't have, if your secret sauce and your IP is the knowledge and the experience of the minds of the people in your business, then that is under threat. It's under threat in a way that I don't think many people have realized just yet, because the technology hasn't got to that point. How do I explain this? So when you're using Claude or ChatGPT and you're prompting, give me a press release and give me a social media post, or think of a campaign plan. The more context you give the model, the better the output, right? So if you say, give me a social media post, that post is going to suck. But if you say, give me a social media post, here's the last 50 posts that we did. Here was the ones that got the most engagement. Here's the audience I'm going for. Here's the actual call to action I want them to take, etc. The more context you give it around the prompt, the better the output's going to be. And if you give it enough relevant context, the output is actually pretty good. Right? But that process is hard to give it all of that context. And that's what we as software providers are doing, is making it easy for you to effectively give it the context, right? That's why we've kind of aligned all of our assets. Like, this is getting very kind of nerdy now for the industry, but the saved searches, the source lists and the filter sets and the author lists, all those kind of assets that our software builds up over time, you can start to use those as context. And that's where we are right now. We're already building that. In fact, all of that is almost all out, right? Ready to go. But that's context. That isn't memory. And memory is becoming the new sort of kind of battleground for this kind of user interaction. So if you're on LinkedIn much, and maybe it's just my LinkedIn because the algorithm knows you well, we're seeing nothing but talk about context graphs. And so this is the increasing capability of AI to start building long-term memory. How do you do a job? What worked and what didn't? That's the kind of the battleground that we're seeing between the SaaS providers right now. And I think that's something that most people haven't really realized is coming for the human secret sources. I remembered, like, I'm going to give you this prompt because I remember what worked 2 years ago and a year ago. But the problem with that approach is, to compare it to the agencies, is when that person walks out the door, all that memory is gone. That experience and the value of that experience is gone. So I think that's another way in which agencies are fragile and really need to start building long-term memory that they can then monetize over a longer period of time. It's not just that our IP is in the minds of our people. It's that the minds of our people have collectively been consolidated over time into the best possible version of what this process can achieve. That's a process that I don't think many people have started, not many people understand, but that is where it's going. And that will be scary for a lot of people, because the context you put into the prompts right now, or your proposition, your secret sauce as a human, is to have built all that context back in the past. I know where all those kind of things went wrong. I remember when we tried that, and here's why it didn't work. And people think that that's sort of inalienably a human characteristic or trait. That too is going to be kind of part of the AI, if you like.
It makes sense. I mean, we've had the whole data is oil conversation since, I don't know, what feels like maybe Tesla. Everyone was like, it's not a car company, it's a data company. And that's why it's so highly valued. And hopefully, most SaaS companies would be kind of supporting their inherent value with this data production. And it sounds like they can find creative ways to maybe start thinking about that now if they haven't been. But yeah, it's interesting because agencies almost, I feel like they're feeling this kind of short-term, maybe short to mid-term burst, because there are hiring freezes, people are outsourcing, they're not wanting the kind of long-term financial commitment of full-time hires and in-house staff. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how that relationship evolves.
Yeah, that you hit a nail like there. That for me is probably one of the most painful parts of this AI revolution. Is the result has been freezing of junior hires and reduction in junior hires, when my argument is you should be hiring more junior people right now, not less, right? AI is an abundance technology, not a scarcity technology, right? It's in the winners in the .com bubble were not the people who thought, hey, this internet thing is great. How do we sort of achieve the same thing we did before, but with less, Like, that isn't the attitude that wins in the AI revolution. The attitude that wins in the AI revolution is, how do we scale? How do we do more? How do we attract more clients? How do we win more clients? How do we serve more clients? How do we give better quality to those clients? Something that we haven't been able to achieve before. Raising the top line, raising the game and the quality, stealing more market share, increasing the size of the market overall. Those are the winners in the AI revolution. right? Because if you're saying what we want to do with AI is cut our costs, then what you're saying is your business model is capped, that there's no more money that you can make, right? We're winning all the market we can. We're making all the money that we can. We just need to try and reduce the bottom line. If that is your business model, you're already screwed, right? Your business model needs to change if you really believe that AI is only useful for cutting your costs. And if you can't imagine a way that it allows you to win more share or to increase the size of your market. And if everyone in that market feels the same way, that market is going to disappear. That, I think, is the realization that people need to have. And if you think that way, then it's not about reducing your junior hires, who are all, frankly, if they're graduating university right now or coming out into the world of work, AI natives. Like, their skill set in AI greatly increased because of the amount of time they've spent using it on their schoolwork. So hire more juniors, but also hire different juniors, right? It's not about just hiring more of the juniors you hired in the past, because the skills you need in the future are going to be different. So the empathy, the relationship building, the critical thinking, the genuinely novel creativity, these are all skills we expect of people in the future. So hire more juniors, make sure they've got that skill set, because the coding mentions for sentiment tasks, those are all going to be automated. So it's about hiring more juniors, but hiring different juniors. And I hope that we get over this bump shortly, that people are thinking AI solely as a cost-cutting measure. I hope we get over that shit soon.
Yeah, again, you put that so well, it almost seems ridiculous now, this kind of capped growth. Why do you think this has been the immediate instinct for vast majority of world-leading companies at this kind of intersection of automation and teams?
Yeah, it's kind of a vicious cycle, right? So remember that narrative. The narrative is AI is going to automate everything, and therefore you don't need as many people. They're selling it on a cost-cutting narrative, right? And that's coming through the investors, through the boards, through the leadership, through the CFOs. Like that is ingrained in them. They're being sold, use AI, you can cut costs. And I think this is actually a problem of the LLM providers themselves. Their narrative is wrong. Their narrative is AI will automate and therefore you don't need as many humans, or you can cut costs, right? So it's part of their narrative that they're saving money, which I think is wrong, right? The OpenAIs and the Anthropics of the world should be kind of messaging that this is about increasing wealth. It's about increasing share and making things better in terms of quality and the amount. And if they did that, there'd be a lot less friction and resistance to the adoption of the AI technologies. Because the challenge is, right, the reason why we haven't seen as fast an impact of this as we would have liked is that the reason that people are buying the technology down through the boards and the investment decisions and the leadership is, oh, if I buy this technology, I can cut a bunch of people. But you need those people to use the technology. You need to get them to invest their time and learn and adapt. And they're not going to do that if their underlying fear is that you're just going to cut me as a result. We need to change our methodology, change our messaging, change the focus, and start getting people thinking about what more can you do with this technology, not what are you going to lose as a result. So I think that's the problem. It's like the narrative itself all the way down is, if I implement this AI, I can probably cut a few heads. And there's a CFO going, great, makes my bottom line look amazing. But the resistance you're going to meet in trying to implement those cuts, right? Because you need people to use the AI to get the value, is going to slow down your ability to realize those cuts. Whereas top line, everyone is for top line. Hey, use this technology really well, and we'll have 10 more of you. Everyone gets a benefit of that. Because when you look down at the individual kind of change management mechanics of adopting new technology, the first thing people ask is, what does this do to me? Not me in my role, me personally. Does this increase my status? Does it make my job more fun? Does it make my life easier, right? Do I look forward to work more than I did before? These are the reasons people use new technologies, right? And if those kind of fear markers are there, which is, if I use this technology, do I still have a job? If I use this technology, do I lose half my team? Do I lose half my budget? Right? Those are reasons people are not going to lean into the technology. So I have a fairly, I don't know, it's weird to me that more people aren't saying this. There was a LinkedIn post I made like a week ago at this point, and then a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I don't understand why the LLM providers aren't messaging like that. It's maybe because too many of the people involved in the hype cycle and too many of the analysts themselves are all money people who everyone gets cuts, like they understand cuts. It's, if you're spending 10 million, I can get you down to 9 is a lot more finite and graspable and real than I can, leave your 10 million, increase it to 10 and a half, but I've just doubled your top line. It feels like make believe and feels like I don't really understand that, but I can cut this known budget. It feels maybe easier for them to grasp.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's this weird preference for certainty at all costs at the moment, and this kind of logic driven era. And I'm sure marketers feel the same way, where it's like growth is quite intangible. You don't know how much you're going to grow, but you do know how much you're going to cut. And you're right. I think everyone's waking up to the notion that these AI leaders might be saying some things that don't really make sense at all. And I think there might be a turn soon if it is hopefully coming from them, because you're right. If they should be wanting more people to use it, not less. So fundamentally, they should be showcasing a kind of growth mindset. You're right. Wow. So inspiring and so thought-provoking, and so many cool things to think about. And I'm definitely sure that you've challenged some people's assumptions and hopefully given the CMOs and marketing leaders of the FINITE podcast some hope, I would say. So thank you so much for coming on.
If those are the people listening, right, I would say to those same people, what got you into the business in the first place? Right? If you created an agency, it wasn't because you're like, I'm being really good at managing these costs, right? You got into the agency because you thought, I know how to develop value, and I think I can scale, and I think I can build a business. That same attitude is what you should keep when it comes to think about how to implement AI. How do I get more of that thing I set out to do in the first place? It would be my parting.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Ant.
No worries. Thanks for having me.